What is up, guys, and welcome back to the Sweat It Out podcast.
If you want to be successful, look inside.
We don't like sitting in the discomfort.
Then all of a sudden that day came when I got $20 and 2 free drinks to do a show, and I was like, oh shit, here we go, baby. You know?
Thank God she hasn't caught a chicken yet, because she'll tear her head off.
Don't be soft.
That patience is key.
If all my friends are winning, then it's going to make me want to win more.
Woo! We are here on the Sweat It Out podcast, and today we have a very, very special guest. She is a woman's intermittent fasting expert, two-time TEDx speaker, nurse practitioner, and she is the host of the Everyday Wellness podcast. Guys, help us welcome the one and only Cynthia Thurlow. How's it going?
I'm doing well. I've been looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, me too. I'm a big proponent of intermittent fasting.
Yeah, he was telling me, he was like, oh man, I can't wait
to dive into this with you. I'm super pumped.
So how have things been for you overall, though? Like, I know we're kind of, talking a little bit before we jumped onto the podcast, but, tell us a little bit about, like, how things got started for you. And most importantly, I think I would say the transition of how things maybe could have shifted during the whole COVID and pandemic era.
Yeah, those are great questions. For me, I'm a traditionally trained Western medicine nurse practitioner, worked in ER medicine and cardiology for 20 years. And, over the course of, even becoming a parent, I started viewing the world very differently. And I actually got to a point where I was starting to I read a book that changed my life. I mean, don't we all have that story? Read a book, read a blog post, read
Which
a
one?
podcast that changed our lives. And so that really shifted my perspective. And I started considering that a lot of the metabolic disease and obesity that we're seeing all starts with food. And so I dove down a rabbit hole. And when I came out, I couldn't align with the kind of traditional medicinal mindset, which is every symptom requires a pill. And let me be clear, there's some incredible work going on. I mean, urgent care, emergent care, surgery, all things we need. I'm not at all denigrating the great work that my colleagues are doing. But for me personally, I really struggled to go to work every day and continue writing prescriptions for people who needed to change their diet and change their lifestyle first. And then maybe they wouldn't have diabetes and they wouldn't have, vascular disease and they wouldn't have high cholesterol and high blood pressure. And so 5 years ago, I left clinical medicine and became an entrepreneur. And so that's where that started. And then, with regard to the pandemic, on so many levels, we know individuals, if they are metabolically unhealthy, not only are they less likely to do well if they contract the virus, but they also have a slew of complications. And so from my perspective, I think metabolic health is really equated with longevity and anti-aging benefits. And intermittent fasting is absolutely a part of that. I actually was introduced to it about 6 years ago, started practicing it almost immediately. And every time I taught the strategy to someone else, people were like, oh, this is such a cool fad. And I'm like, no, it's so not fad.
No, definitely not.
Actually, the way our bodies are designed to thrive, we're not designed to have an onslaught of calories in all day long and liquid calories. And I'll share with you all that there was a statistic that was introduced to me by a colleague a few months ago. And he said, I read a research article was talking about either individuals in the United States are consuming a sugar sweetened beverage or food 16 to 17 times a day. And I thought to myself, I wonder why we're fat and sick because our bodies are not designed to be eating so frequently. And so now I feel even more passionate. I feel like I can touch more lives. I can absolutely touch more lives by being a platform for intermittent fasting, being able to advocate for women and obviously families and communicate in a very different way. As an introvert, you can hide in clinical medicine. You can hide because you see one patient at a time and you're in an exam room and you control all the variables. Whereas on social media, podcasts, as you all know, you have the opportunity to connect with so many more people and make a larger impact. So that's a little bit of how my whole kind of journey started professionally.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned a couple of great points. One, the introvert thing. I'm definitely more of an introvert than Anthony is, and it's such a challenge for me because I'm like, oh, you can just talk the whole time if you want. I love just listening to some some of the best experts in, in their respective fields. And I'm like, okay, well, if you want to talk, like I'm a nerd, so I'm happy just like listening and, and then adding in some.
You talk.
But on the, the way that we evolve to eat, it always blows my mind when I explain it to, my clients or just people that, might be reaching, asking, what's going on with their diet and why they feel so bad. I'm like, well, like you said, like we didn't evolve to be in a caloric surplus. Like maybe in acute bouts of time, right? Like you kill a woolly mammoth, like, yeah, sure, you're going to have a lot of fat and a lot of protein, or, you come across like a swath of, vegetables or something. And yeah, sure, maybe then you're in a caloric surplus, but then you might go 2 or 3 days without eating, because you're not going to find that, and you have to feed the whole community. And they're like, man, I never really thought about it like that, and again, I feel like when you tell people like, well, you should eat how you evolved, they tend to go into the deep end of like paleo and all. I'm like, it doesn't necessarily, like, you don't have to eat, 1,000 tubers or, try to go out and find a woolly mammoth that doesn't exist anymore. So you could eat like you did 10,000 years ago, but, use those concepts for how we live in society today and try to adjust it for our norms and how we, think about things culturally and societally. And, it's always great when we get to talk to someone who, is kind of on the same page with that and is preaching the same quality message. So, amazing. How, you mentioned that one book you read. What was that book and what was that aha moment where you're like, oh my God, like, why didn't I think about this before?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So I have a child with life-threatening food allergies. So when my son was 4 months old, he had terrible eczema. And kind of the traditional mindset is you put topical steroids on it and you don't really worry about it. You just keep treating the symptoms, treat the symptoms, make the inflammation go away. And, after about a year of that, I said to the pediatrician, do you think maybe it's something I'm eating? Because he was at the time when the eczema started, I was breastfeeding. Oh, no. And so I, on my own, decided to take him to get an allergist, to the allergist. We found out he had life-threatening food allergies. And so the book that I read was The Unhealthy Truth. And that completely changed the trajectory of my life because I was so angry when I read it, when I really started to understand and appreciate how corrupt Big Ag is, how corrupt the lobbyists are, how they do not give a darn about our health, our family's health, anything. My eyes were wide open and I'm hoping, I'm like crossing my fingers. I've been completely begging Robin O'Brien to come on the podcast because I feel like I truly have such a grateful heart because that is what truly shifted my whole perspective. Like as I read a chapter in the book, got angry. I was like, okay, I need to take this anger and put it towards some good use. Don't just get angry about it and do nothing. And I do, much to your point, I think dogma in general is so polarizing and irrespective if it's this, you have to eat a big breakfast and it's the most important meal of the day and you need lots of heart healthy grains. But it even becomes dogmatic within kind of the nutritional paradigms. And so sometimes people get very rigid and, whether it's keto or paleo or veganism or, whatever philosophy you kind of align with, carnivore, some of the carnivore people.
Oh man, I have some zealots. I've trained some zealot. They're like, no, you don't understand. Like only I'm like, listen, man, like I love vegetables. Like don't take, you can't take those away from me. You know, like, but no, they're not good for you. Like, oh, I promise you, like I've been eating them my whole life. I promise you they're good for you. Like you don't have to eat them if you know. I love some broccoli. I love spinach. I love salads, And
sometimes you don't know how much you love them until you can't eat them. I had a healthcare hiccup 2 years ago and I went 9 months doing carnivore and not per se because I wanted to just eat meat. It was the only thing that didn't upset my digestive system. And let me tell you, did I celebrate when I hit about 18 months and I could have Brussels sprouts and broccoli? Oh yeah. So I think that the key is that it's all about bio-individuality. For anyone who's listening, both of you are shaking your head yes, so you totally are on board with that. But
I love it.
So much of it is.
You can say that again if you want.
Go ahead.
Yeah, bio-individuality. And so for each one of us, it can be something completely different. Maybe you do well with paleo and maybe you do fine with dairy and maybe I do horribly with dairy and therefore can't eat it. And that is totally okay. I just hate the rhetoric. And I love Twitter, except sometimes on Twitter, you get these nutritional paradigm wars. And sometimes these people just get vicious. And I always say, like, what it ultimately comes down to. And then when people really want to get petty, they're like, where did you get your reference?
Yeah. Are you going to read the research study? You're going to read this meta-analysis? You're really going to do that?
Exactly. I had a guy yesterday try to tell me, he was asking me questions about fasting and he wanted my references for my book. And I said, no. No, I'm not giving you the references for my book because that was like blood, sweat, and tears. But the point I'm trying to make is that if we all acknowledge that we just need to be attuned to what works for our body, 100%. Be connected to our bodies, be honest with ourselves. You know, you can eat pounds and pounds of nuts and cheese, but that may not serve you well. You know, maybe a 35-year-old guy can do that and do hardcore keto, and then, you know, a 50-year-old woman can't.
Yeah.
And so just accepting that, you know, there's so many factors that play into how well we align with a particular nutritional paradigm. Or dogma for that matter.
I love that you said that because it's like we've talked about it a lot. It's like, you know, what people going around like, oh no, but this is the healthy way to do it. It's like, what's really healthy?
Right.
Right? Like, what's really the definition of healthy? It's like, what works for you, right? At the time being. And I think a lot of people want to just push their narrative like, no, this is the way. This is how it has to be. But guys, there's no one size fits all. You know, like there's different things that can work for different people, you know, depending where they're at in their life, age-wise, or whatever they're doing. And it can work better for them at that moment, and maybe later on it shifts, and that's okay. And that's the thing I think a lot of people don't look at it. They're like, oh, that is okay? Yes, that it's okay. Like, it doesn't have to be what these people pushed out. And obviously, people are also trying to make money off their product, right? Everybody's trying to also push out their product to be the best of this and that because they want to make money at the end of the day. So it all goes back to money being a factor as well to drive this message or this product down your throat so you can spend on it. So there's also that variable that I think a lot of people don't take into consideration as well.
Yeah, no, and I think that transparency piece is really important. I think for, you know, heart-directed entrepreneurs, people that are really doing this out of the goodness of their heart because they genuinely want to share a message is a very authentic message versus, you know, some of the snake oil salesman people that are out there. And I know just because in the health and wellness space, I come across people like that all the time. They even try to, you know, snake oil salesman me and colleagues. And
that's the best part, right? I love that.
Oh, man.
I love that. You know, and it's unfortunate, but it's great that, you know, there are people like yourself, there are people like us out there that are, you know, open and honest about, like, you know, I've had clients in the past be like, oh, you know, I like donuts. I'm like, okay, well, you can, I mean, don't eat 1,000 of them, but you know, you can eat a donut. No, I don't think I can eat a donut. I don't think, well, why don't you think you can eat, like, what is it about? Is it the donut? Is it what people are, you know, so one of my clients was like so adamant about, you know, donuts are the worst thing for you. You know what? Just to prove it to you, you train with me every day. You train with me at 8 a.m. I'm going to eat a donut every day at the beginning of your sessions. And I promise you, you know, I'm going to lose weight at the end of this. You know, and I equated for calories. And I'm not saying that everybody should eat a donut every day, right? That's not, I was doing it to prove a point to somebody. But I ate the donut for 365 days. He trained with me most of the year. And at the end of the year, I lost like 7 pounds. And he's like, I don't understand how it happened. I'm like, because it's not the end all be all. You know what I mean? Right. There's a ton of different things that you can do in order to make sure that you're equating for calories, that you're getting your macronutrients in, your micronutrients, the phytonutrient, everything that you really need to sustain a healthy lifestyle, you know. But if you let this like circular piece of dough, you know, cripple your mindset and cripple your ability to go out there and perform and act on the things that you need to act on, you're not going to be able to get anywhere, right? And it does come back to that dogmatic practice that a lot of people are trying to push on others.
Well, and I think, you know, metabolic flexibility is really key. Like
Huge.
You're metabolically flexible, so your body can account for that. Now, if you're 300 pounds and you want to eat a donut every day,
right,
that's not going to serve you well. And
exactly.
I think on so many levels, like I used to say all the time, like moderation, not deprivation. And we all have to find out what that represents for us. But I'm starting to find, depending on, you know, this last 15, 16 months, I think for many of us really showed us like, what are our vices? You know, what are the things that we're compelled to do under stress? I tend to exercise. I tend to walk a lot. But, you know, I've had friends tell me, oh, I gained like the COVID-19 because I drank alcohol every night and like ate all these sweets. And I was like, but did you feel good? Because when you ask people how they felt when they're binging on hyper palatable, hyper kind of caloric foods, generally they'll say, no, I felt like crap. Like maybe the first bite tasted good, but then I couldn't help myself. And so that's very different than, you know, having a couple bites of a donut and being metabolically flexible. And I think the challenge for all of us is really helping people determine, like, are you connected to your body? That's number one. Because I know when I eat like crap, I feel like crap. And then I'm like, okay, I never want to do that again. Whereas a lot of other people, they're just numb. They're numb to everything they experience. So they're not as attuned to how their body feels, and their blood sugar spikes and then drops, and how they feel when their digestion slowed, and all sorts of things. But I'm glad that you do really talk to your clients about nutrition, because I've come to find my experience, like, over the years of having different trainers, was that at the very beginning, they didn't talk to me about nutrition. And yet we all know that's like probably the most important thing you can do for your health.
No. And, you know, I do think it's so important. And the way that I try to explain it to my clients is that, you know, weight training will get you body composition that you might want, right? You'll be able to put on muscle. You'll be able to look, you know, that long, lean look that especially a lot of women want, right? That is maybe a little more difficult for them to put on than men. But at the end of the day, it's your nutrition that's going to make you feel good, right? And that's going to help you sustain the energy level that you need throughout the day to be productive, to stay focused, to perform the way that you want to perform, right? The weight training is, I think, just as important as sleep and as a nutrition, but they have very different, you know, aspects to them that end up at the end result that you want to get to. And you need the combination of all three to be able to get to where you want to go at the end of the road. Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry. There's so many factors that impact our ability to build muscle. And it's, you're right. It's what we eat, how well we sleep, how we manage our stress. You know, do we do the same exact exercises and lifting schedule every single day we go to the gym? I see a lot of that too. Got to lift heavy enough too. So
amen.
Amen to that. Say it again.
You're saying these things that I wish more people said. Lift heavy.
No, you have to lift heavy enough. It should be hard. Like, it shouldn't be easy. I mean, obviously there are differing programs depending on people's goals, but I find for women, we really have to be diligent. So I was laughing. I was watching a colleague do a Insta story, and honest to God, she was pushing the leg press machine with no weight. Are you warming up? I teasingly sent her a message. Are you warming up? And she's like, oh no, I'm lifting. I'm like, but you don't have any weight on even if it's just 90 pounds, like 2 45-pound plates, like put something on there. And even if it's 10 pounds every time you lift, I mean, you need to, you know, push the muscle, you know, push your muscles to fatigue. And so she was kind of humored by that. She thought just by moving the leg press machine, that was going to build muscle. I was like, no, not really.
Yeah. No, and the way I was explaining, especially with women, I'm like, you know, with how prevalent osteoporosis has become, you know, and most women early in their life aren't really doing load bearing exercises, which helps build bone density and helps build, you know, the musculature that'll help support the skeletal system and the connective tissue. Like, you need to be lifting weight unless you want to be one of those old ladies who's walking around with a walker and like a rascal at 70, which nobody wants. You know, you have to be putting your body under a certain level of progressive stress that will help, you know, trigger this adaptation that, you know, is so important for us to survive.
So now the question is, how much is Cynthia leg pressing?
So you have to remember, I lost a lot of muscle in 2019 because I was in the hospital for so long. So it took me probably almost a year to put 10 pounds of muscle on. So right now I'm doing about 250, which isn't bad considering I'm like 115 pounds.
That's solid.
Okay.
Now I'm not doing a lot at one time, but you know, I laugh because
we're definitely not just doing the
gym.
weight of the machine.
Yeah. Well, and what's funny is there's always guys who will say things like, can I help you pull the weights off? I'm like, no.
I think they might just be hitting on you, you know?
Maybe. Could be that.
I don't know. When I'm like at the gym, I don't talk to anybody. I'm in my zone. It's my time. I'm polite, but I'm just very fixated. And my gym just finally, I know you all in Florida are a little more progressive, but we just since June 1st have been able to like walk into the gym without a mask and be able to exercise and not have to have a mask on, which has been really nice. Although there's still people that are walking around with them. And I'm like, if I have an option
Boom.
I'm not wearing a mask while I
I know
exercise.
they finally let us, like, we run out some office space for our studio, and they finally told us, like, oh, you don't need to wear them. I was like, thank God, thank God. You know, I mean, I live in Puerto Rico most of the year, and they're still pretty strict. So they finally let go of it outdoors. I'm like, this shouldn't have even been a question the whole time. Like, everyone's at the beach. Like, why do we have to wear a mask here? You know, there's a breeze.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I was having a conversation with my children because we're actually getting on a plane for the first time, and we're big travelers, but obviously haven't done any plane travel since 2020. And having a conversation saying, okay, well, we're in the airport. This is what we're going to be doing. We're on the airplane. This is what we're going to be doing. When we get off the airplane and we're out of the airport, we don't have to wear a mask probably for the next 4 days. We're going to Montana.
Love it.
And they were, you know, my kids have been so kind of conditioned over the last 16 months that they have to wear masks all the time, you know, mandated masks where we are. That I said, I think it's going to be nice there. You know, we're going to be outside of Glacier National Park. We're going to be I have a business event. And so it's going to be nice just to feel a little degree of normalcy. I think for so many of us, that's just really what we crave. Like, I'd like to see people smiling, and I'd like to be able to see, you know, more than just someone's eyes, and just be guessing what it is they're trying to say saying to me behind plexiglass. Like, there's plexiglass everywhere. Yeah. And just, you know, I don't have any problems with my hearing, but half the time straining to hear people, I'm like, what? What?
And also, like, you got that plexiglass, but you're touching all of my food that I'm about to bring home with me. So, like, I don't really get that. Yeah. You know?
I'll tell you, like, I would say, like, I'm glad that my little one was only about a year and a few months going through this transition. Yeah. So she didn't have to wear a mask. You know what I mean? So it's not like, so I was happy to see that and know that she didn't have to wear one. Yeah. And also knowing that she's still so little to, even when she's older, have to remember this is a huge scarring or like huge trauma in her life. You know, it's just more like, no, I'm just going on. I'm a little baby going through my day, you know? So that to me was like, I was happy that she was that age and not older. So I thought that was cool. Question for you, because I'm really curious. I know you put in, you know, in your practice, women's intermittent fasting expert. So what made you want to focus mainly on women?
You know, it's funny. I don't think initially it was intentional. You know, when I left clinical medicine and I started my business, it was really just focused on nutrition, but I kept getting the same type of client over and over and over again, which was really a middle-aged woman, which is what I am. And so it became apparent that people really wanted answers and weren't getting the degree or the depth of care that they wanted / needed. And let's be honest, for anyone that's listening, you know, we focus on women a lot, like when they start getting their periods and contraception and pregnancy and the postpartum period. And then, you know, once women are kind of beyond the stages where they want to continue having babies, there's like this abyss. And so I think there's not enough like focus and research, or what is talked about is like, you know, middle-aged women are obese and they're unhealthy and they've got weight problems and they're having hot flashes. And so like all these super sexy topics. And so initially it wasn't intentional, but then I started recognizing a pattern, and then I started creating programs around the patterns that I was seeing. And then in 2018, I always believe in like having big, scary goals. And so I decided I'm an introvert and I love public speaking, but it would be really awesome to do a TED Talk. And so my husband thought I was crazy just because I'm so introverted. And I got offered a couple, and each one wanted me to do a women's health focus. And so first talk was on women, second talk on fasting. They had said, you know, we always get asked to have a women's health focused topic. And so would you be willing to speak to women in intermittent fasting? And so that's how that actually happened, not realizing that talk would, you know, change my life on so many levels. You know, I took my then 11-year-old with me to South Carolina. I was just excited to, you know, get on a plane and do something I love, and got up and did the talk and got off the stage and said to my coach, I was like, that's the worst talk I've ever done. I was like, you know, because they only give you so much time to speak. And I had to cut out 3 minutes of my talk because I realized I was running out of time.
How much time is it that they give you?
For that one, it was 12. I had 18 for my first one. And believe it or not, it's actually harder to do a shorter, tighter, more concise talk than it is to do a longer one. So I got off the stage thinking, oh, checkbox. I've done a second talk. That's awesome. I'm done, having zero idea what was coming. But clearly people wanted/needed the information because it's obviously resonated with people. So to answer your question again, it was really not intentional initially, but then I've come to realize this is really my life's work. Beyond being a mom, beyond being my husband's wife, this is really meant to be my life's work.
Amazing.
So
That's amazing.
Yeah, I would love, to dive deep. I mean, obviously intermittent fasting is something that's, started to really come into the mainstream in terms of the health field and nutrition and wellness. But for those of who are listening who maybe aren't fully grasping the concept of intermittent fasting, can you kind of explain it, how intermittent fasting works, what it is, what's beneficial about the body, and then maybe the type of protocol that you like to implement with your clientele?
yeah, so intermittent fasting is sounds more complicated than it is, but what it really represents is that you're eating less often, and you're eating in a way that is very aligned with ancestral health patterns, meaning this is how our ancestors ate. This is how people ate before there was refrigeration and, quick marts and grocery stores that were open 24/7. And it really just encourages you to embrace having a period of time when you're not eating. And during that time, that's where you get all these amazing benefits, and, you get lowered insulin levels. And so that drives the ketone bodies, which, fuel your brain. There's something called BHB, or beta hydroxybutyrate. And this is like the superior fuel source for the brain. It diffuses across the blood-brain barrier. So people say, I have so much mental clarity, I have so much energy. And this is one of the reasons we know it drives autophagy, which is this waste and recycling process in the body. And as you get older, it's kind of like a pair of used tires. So over time, you wear out the treads. What do? You have to buy new tires. Where if you think about autophagy as you're trading in the old tires, you're getting rid of the broken up crappy tires that have lost their tread, and now they're putting new tires on the car. So the car is going to drive better. It's going to be more efficient. It's going to get better gas mileage. Very similar to what you see with fasting. Other benefits, people have improved biophysical markers, aiding up their diabetes medicine, their blood pressure medicine, reduces your risk of developing some neurologic diseases like Parkinson's. It lowers our risk for metabolic diseases like Alzheimer's, which is type 3 diabetes or diabetes. And so when I walk people through how to intermittent fast, first they have to wrap their heads around it, that yes, you are not going to starve. Most of us have plenty of endogenous, meaning fat in our bodies that our bodies can break down for food. We have to burn through the surplus of carb for energy that most of us have. And, Jason Fung does this amazing analogy. He's great with analogies. He talks about the refrigerator. So the refrigerator is the carbs, and it's easy to open it up and pull out the food you need. And, things in the freezer, those are the fat. That's the fat store. It takes a little longer. You have to thaw things out. It doesn't, it's not like a quick source of energy. And so when I'm talking to people, it's really ascribing, like, you probably finished dinner, let's just say hypothetically, at 6 o'clock at night. You don't eat breakfast till 8. You're already fasting 14 hours. Like, you're already doing it. So it's really kind of encouraging people to understand the concept of not snacking, adjusting your macros so that you can make it from breakfast to lunch and dinner. And that's usually where I start from, is stop snacking and then stack your macros. And stacking your macros really means protein is your most satiating macronutrient. So you want to focus there. I can't speak to guys, but I know women generally don't consume enough protein. And I'm of the belief system that if you consume enough protein, you are not going to continue eating food because you're too full.
Facts.
You're too full
Facts.
to keep eating food.
I always tell them, eat a tomahawk steak and then let me know if you're full. And let me know if you could still eat some food.
Yeah, no, I mean, I laugh when even the teenagers, if you put enough meat in them, they will slow their roll down for a while. And then, making sure you're getting plenty of healthy fats. And then, I always say, earn your carbs. Non-starchy vegetables are very different, but if you're having starchy vegetables, you tolerate grains, root vegetables, et cetera, you have to earn them. And especially for women, unfortunately, we can't just eat the way we did when we were 20. And so that's really how I get them started. And then and understanding what the concept of a clean fast is. And there's a lot of variations of fasting, but I like to ascribe to a clean fast so that people get the best results. I always say, if you are having a 400 calorie fatty coffee during your fasting window and you're trying to lose weight, you're not doing yourself any favors, like zero favors. And unfortunately, we have this culture where people are like, oh, I have a fatty coffee in the morning, I'm not hungry till 2. I'm like, well, of course you're not.
Because 800 calories. Yeah. You put a half a stick of butter in there, of course you're not going to be hungry.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, there's differing philosophies. So obviously if you're on the standard American diet, you're 300 pounds, you're sitting on the couch. Yes, it is going to be very hard to go from being a carb burner, physically inactive and metabolically unhealthy, to being able to fast like a duck to water. Whereas if someone just really needs to lose 5 or 10 pounds, they're already active, they maybe have some, dietary indiscretions here and there. When they clean up their diet, they're going to get nearly instantaneous results. And I think in the concept of like the former, when you're looking at people that are metabolically unhealthy, do I think a fatty coffee, not a 400 calorie one, but maybe 150, 200 calories, is that going to help them get maybe from breakfast to lunch initially? It's like putting training wheels on a bike. And so it's always that analogy of maybe that will help them, spurn their interest and their desire to fast. And then, we kind of go from there. It's like you get the kind of easy variables. Clean fasting means filtered water, plain bitter coffee, and bitter tea. Bitter tea does not mean like celestial seasonings, like apple orchard teas. I mean, I could like pull a hair out for every time I get a question about some tea that like the first ingredient is fruit. And I'm like, no, not while fasting. So bitter teas, and you can consume as much as you want, depending on how tolerant you are to caffeine. Obviously, if you're caffeine sensitive, don't drink coffee in the middle of the afternoon. You'll probably be wide awake at night. But that's usually a starting point for people. And I find if they can get the basics down, like they get the training wheels on, they're successful, they take the training wheels off, and then they can start experimenting with different fasting windows. And that really depends on people's goals. I have some people that fast twice a week and that works for them. Obviously, women who are still in the peak fertile years, so under the age of 35, have to fast a little bit differently than, women in perimenopause before they go through menopause and menopause. And then men, I mean, let's be honest, you guys have much less hormonal fluctuations than women.
I feel blessed.
So I think that makes it a whole lot easier for guys to be able to fast, and menopausal women, like those two groups generally can fast a little bit more easily than women who are still getting their menstrual cycle.
I think that's all important, things that you mentioned right there, and definitely super, super beneficial. And it goes to my question where when it comes to the benefits and the pros in intermittent fasting, what have you seen being the differences between women intermittent fasting and men intermittent fasting? Like, what are the benefits that women get more, and what are the benefits that men get more?
Well, I think it goes back to bio-individuality. Like, I think men can fast throughout the month, whereas women, I don't like women to fast the week before their period. So there's some limitations there. When you're looking at like boosts in human growth hormone, obviously men are going to get much higher spikes in human growth hormone, but we know that with, certain degrees of fasting, women will get the same. Men seem to get faster results. So meaning they can lose fat more easily, more readily, because they don't have the same, sex hormone fluctuations that women do with estrogen and progesterone and, to a much more minor extent, testosterone. So from my perspective, I find that women seem, and this is anecdotal, this is not based on like research, but in my clinical experience, women seem to do better oftentimes with longer fasts than men. And I don't fully account for why that happens. Maybe it's
patience.
Women can just, a lot of it's mental, so much of it is mental. Like I'm going to manifest this. It is going to happen. I do think that men get results faster, and that can be a source of contention because I'll have couples that will do group programs and then they're constantly comparing themselves to their spouse. And I'm like, most weight gain is a hormone imbalance. Yeah. So I always remind them, like, you have different hormones, or you have hormones that fluctuate every day of the month, whereas men's are much more stable, as are menopausal women. And so I think that definitely works to an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time. But I think so much of it is mental. And I just find sometimes with the longer fasts, women seem to be like more committed, but that is not to suggest that every single woman and man that's listening, that's the case. I think it's always like focusing on what your goals are. And I can say for men, it seems to not necessarily always be about weight, whereas with women, almost always it's body composition. And I suspect it's partly like whether it's social media or just social conditioning or cognitive dissonance. It's this thought process. Like people get very fixated on the scale, especially women. I'm sure you guys see it.
Yeah.
They get really fixated on a number. Like they're like, I want to be the weight I was when I was 17. I'm like, okay, well, that's probably not realistic, you know?
Yeah. I have a rule in my house that we're not allowed to have a scale. And I've been gone for I've been in Puerto Rico for maybe like 7 days, and my girlfriend's like, oh, well, I found this scale. It was like $7. I was like, that's great. By the time I get home at midnight tonight, that better not be there, because that shouldn't, gauge your thought process on who you are as a person, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just a number. You probably build some muscle. Again, like you said, the hormone shifts that women have definitely cause weight fluctuations much differently than men. And especially when it comes to progesterone and estrogen,
Yep.
you know what I mean? And I couldn't agree more about, not fasting when women are on their period, because, you need those calories to boost insulin to be able to, get the type of hormonal and responses that are necessary for you to function while you're going through this, weekly or 10-day period of your life.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because I usually say 5 to 7 days preceding your menstrual cycle, no fasting, and actually increase your quality of good carbohydrates. And then I have to remind people, like, I'm not talking about 500 calories. I'm talking about maybe like 150, maybe 200, depending on how physically active you are. Because people take that as, oh, I can eat all the ice cream. No, we're not talking about it. Talking about like sweet potato or squash, or if you tolerate grains. I tend to be of the philosophy, I'm not sure if you all are aligned with this, that, gluten and dairy generally are highly inflammatory for women by a certain age, which some people still want to embrace it, and they're going to be super dogmatic, and they're not going to like let go of it. And then sometimes when people kick dairy out of their diets, they're like, oh, I lost like 5 pounds just from not eating dairy. I'm like, yep.
Yeah, I grew up in the country, so milk's always been like a big staple in I could drink a gallon of milk and no problem. My girlfriend even like looks at the jug of milk. She's like, oh, my stomach. Oh, my, and I'm like, well, I'm all right. It's more for me. Thank you. But, you brought up the thing about, clean fast, having coffee or tea, as long as, there's no, sugar, and it's just purely the coffee or the tea. What is the, and obviously there's a big push on like water fast now, right? Water only fast. So what is the difference in the fat, with the benefits of fasting when you do just go with a water only fast versus, implementing some sort of caffeinated beverage in there as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So water with electrolytes, let me be very clear, water with electrolytes. If you are fasting, you always have electrolytes. It's really critically important. We lose, especially if we're lower carb, we have a lot of renal losses of sodium as well as magnesium, potassium. We have to replace that. And if you're new to fasting and you don't, you will probably develop something called keto flu, where you get headaches and nausea and you get achy, and it's just miserable and you feel crummy. So let me just tuck that in. Just plain water fasting is just keeping your body hydrated. That's really, that's and keeping, the detoxification pathways open, et cetera. The benefits of adding in polyphenol rich, so both plain coffee, high quality mold-free coffee, and bitter teas have polyphenols that we know can boost fat oxidation. There's a lot of intrinsic benefits. I remind people that I'm not a coffee or a tea drinker by nature, like at all. And I laugh every morning. I make green tea, and every morning I let it cool, and then I slurp it down with a straw, because I just don't love it. But I recognize there's so many intrinsic properties to green tea, black tea, coffee that are hugely beneficial. And I remind people, like, if you're trying to change body composition, you're leaving a degree of fat oxidation benefits in those drinks if you're not consuming them. So for some people, they do it because they like the caffeine. Some people like fat oxidation benefits. I just look at it as I'm getting plant-based compounds that are, helping support the needs of my body and my brain. There's also L-theanine in green tea, which has this calming kind of amino acid. So you can do clean fasts with coffee and tea and water. You can do clean fasts with just water. You can do clean fast, hopefully not over caffeinating yourself with coffee and bitter teas. But, I look at them as being synonymous, but you really want, like, I'm all about hacking fasting. Like, what are the things I can do that can make fasting more efficacious? And you're leaving some hacks to fasting on the table if you're not taking advantage of, consuming some type of, polyphenol rich drink during your fast. And that's just, I look at it as it's just an easy thing to do. It takes 5 minutes of your time and then, check the box, that's done.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I'm definitely going to be able to implement it for myself too. So thank you for sharing that.
I've never seen somebody eat so much food in my entire life as this guy.
Well,
I mean, it works for you though. He's always like, man, you don't eat a ton. I'm like, I'm just not that hungry, but I think it goes back to what you're saying about just a individual awareness, right? And what works for you as, an individual person.
Now when it comes to, somebody who might have heard the term before, intermittent fasting, but has never done it, maybe know somebody who did it or not, curious but scared, hearing different things. How do you best approach it, when kind of introducing this to somebody and kind of sharing with them the benefits of what it can do for them, but without also scaring them away? Because I think that's another thing when it comes to trying these new things and figuring out what's best for my body, with whatever, if it's something else that works for them. But when it comes to intermittent fasting, what do you feel is the best approach when it's somebody new?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because there is a lot of fear about not eating, because we've been conditioned. Remember, we've been conditioned for our entire lifetimes that we need to eat frequently so we can boost metabolism.
Every 2 to 3 hours, that metabolic window.
It's been, I think about how many little containers I used to take to clinic that I would eat after I lifted and before I saw a patient and midway through my morning and then at lunchtime. I think the first thing is what are someone's goals? For some people, they want the mental health benefits. They want to boost autophagy. They want, maybe they're slightly insulin resistant. And so they know that if they're eating less often, that they can help improve their insulin sensitivity. And so I think it really starts from there, and then you can kind of tailor recommendations. But overall, I remind people that even fasting for 12 hours is going to give you a degree of digestive rest that most of us don't experience. And there's actually something in the gut, and this is one of those nerdy things that I oftentimes will just share with people. It's called the migrating motor complex. Yep. And really, you need 4 to 5 hours in between your meals to make sure this complex in our gut really helps to clear out debris, parasites, bacteria, etc. Now, you need a minimum of 90 minutes, but really what you need is 4 or 5 hours, which is perfect. That's really like lunch to dinner or breakfast to lunch. Really explaining to people that your body is not optimized if you're eating with greater meal frequency. And so when people are scared, first and foremost, you want to reassure them that, you're going to be there every step of the way. But I always remind them it's slow and steady wins. So if they're terrified about doing even 12 hours of fasting, just say, okay, we're going to eat dinner at 6 o'clock at night. And 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, you can have a cup of coffee, and maybe you can have a teaspoon of MCT oil. And we're going to kind of ride out, when you first get that first wave of hunger, and explaining to people that hunger is sometimes dehydration, and that hunger comes in waves, and that while you're fasted, you have these counter-regulatory hormones that are impacted upon that will actually drive down and ultimately suppress hunger. And so I remind people that a lot of those fears are limiting beliefs. And so that mindset piece really comes into play. And I'll say, okay, let's commit to doing 12 hours of fasting. And then the next week we'll do 13 hours of fasting. And the next week we'll do 14 hours of fasting. And then as they build their confidence, they start to realize this really isn't all that bad. And then they're not missing the late night snacking. They're not missing drinking after dinner. They're not missing the energy dips that they were getting throughout the day, or feeling sleepy after lunch. I mean, how many people experience that because they had this very carb dense lunch?
I used to have to take a nap every afternoon.
Yeah.
Every afternoon, and I think part of it too, along those lines, is when you're giving yourself a much smaller window to get a specific amount of food, and you have to be much more intentional about the types of food that you're putting in your body, right? Yep. And you have to be much more aware of the sensations that go along with that, right? You mentioned I'm going to feel starved. Okay, well, what's wrong with feeling a little hungry every now and then? You feel sad sometimes, you feel happy sometimes. Being hungry is just something that is just feedback that your body is giving you. Right. And you mentioned the gut, and people don't realize that, most of the information that your brain processes comes from the bacteria that happens to be inside of your gut, and it's really that that world inside of your body that's causing you to get these types of emotions. So if the bacteria feeds off of the, unhealthy things, and you don't give it to it, it's going to want more of that, right? If you start fueling your body with things that are healthier for you to eat and much more palatable and digestible, then your body eventually over time the bacteria inside of your gut is going to, shift its own belief structure and start to want more of those things, right? And then you have the snowball effect of, more positive, healthy behaviors in your life.
Yep, which then trickles on to the people around you, yourself, your work, right? Your self-care, your business, everything, right? And then, everybody's winning. You're winning. Everybody around you is winning because you are taking care of yourself the right way, and you're now putting out into the world more of this positive energy that started from the way that you were taking care of your own health.
Yeah. And I think, for me, our children, view all of our decisions and view the way that we take care of ourselves, whether it's, they see us getting up and going to the gym. They see us going out for a run. They see us eating, healthy food. I mean, I was downstairs with one of my teenagers before I got on this call, and, I had a bison burger with avocado. I had asparagus. And then I had, because I'm dairy free, I had coconut milk yogurt with a scoop of protein powder, and I had macadamia nuts and blueberries. And my son was like, that looks really good.
Sounds good. Now you're making me hungry.
Good. Yeah, no. So it's one of those things where, like, now that my body is so connected with my brain, like, I knew my body needed a higher protein meal, which I got 2 of them together. And I'm so full right now, like, I don't know if I'll eat again before I go to bed. I may not. And that's totally okay. Like, my body will be able to kind of adjust and shift based on that. But I think for so many of us, we are disconnected. We are numbed to the way our body feels. We're numb to hunger. There's actually a guy that I interviewed on the podcast very recently, and he's an engineer. So that just is very data driven. And he has a very fresh, unique, which I think is brilliant perspective on fasting, and, helps people through plateaus. And a lot of his work focuses on people knowing what their blood sugar is when they get hungry, and that you develop a trigger point at which you eat. And if you don't hit that trigger point, you don't eat. And so let's say for both of you, you get an average of what your blood sugar is when you get hungry, and you know what it is. And I wear a continuous glucose monitor, but let's say you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor and you feel hungry and your blood sugar is 102, and you're like, I'm not hungry. That's an emotional hunger. So I can go, maybe I'm going to go take a walk. I'm going to do something else. I'll delay eating. And then you eat when your blood sugar actually comes down and you get hungry. And so, like, that concept of hunger is something for some people is very triggering. There's a lot of emotional connection to food for many people. I didn't grow up that way. I guess my vice was probably moving. I was like a very active kid, but for a lot of people, that connection with food is so emotional that they don't sense when they're full, and they don't sense when they're hungry. They just keep eating, and that can be hugely destructive.
100%.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Especially when you're in different cultures too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're talking to 2 former fat boys, so we understand that all too well.
225 pounds in high school, both of us.
230,
wow.
Yeah, almost 230, yeah.
I was playing football too, so
down to 180 now. So, but Cynthia, it's been fantastic. Obviously, I'm a huge advocate of intermittent fasting, so it's great to get your expertise, really especially when it comes to women. Like, as a man, I really only know deep down what works for men because I am one, right? So to be able to hear, the benefits of intermittent fasting and how you can adapt it, for women is only going to really help, not only myself coach other women, but, for those women who are listening to our podcast, 100%. Help them feel a lot more confident. So I want to thank you for coming on the pod and sharing your story and sharing your expertise. How can people reach out to you? And what's the best way to learn more about how they can get involved with what you're doing with intermittent fasting as well?
Yeah, thank you. Probably the best place to start is my website, www.cynthiathurlow.com. I have a great podcast called Everyday Wellness. I'm on social media everywhere. I'm on YouTube, very small, very, very small, growing legion of people on YouTube, but Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We have a private free Facebook group called Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle / my name. You're welcome to find me there.
Love it.
People really like it because I actually answer the questions that people ask.
Gonna have my girlfriend join that for sure. She'll be obsessed.
Yeah. Yeah, people like, you actually answer the question. I'm like, yeah, if my team doesn't know the answer to the question, because sometimes I'm sure much like you all, you get the same question over and over and over again. But sometimes people ask questions and I'm like, I need to go in and answer that because my team won't know how to respond. So, but yeah, I would love to connect with your listeners outside of the podcast as well.
I appreciate that. Once again, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and impacting our audience and more listeners out there in the world. Just like we always like to end it on a powerful note on our podcast, what is the biggest piece of advice you can leave off to all our listeners today in one single sentence?
Eat less often.
Oof.
So true. So true. What an amazing way to wrap up this podcast. Cynthia Thurlow is one of the leading experts in intermittent fasting for women. If you want to check out anything that has to do with intermittent fasting and you're a woman, please reach out to her anywhere, social media at Cynthia Thurlow. Check out her website, cynthiathurlow.com. She's there to help you. And if you really enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more from us, make sure you subscribe anywhere podcasts are listened to. YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the notification bell as well so you can stay up to date on all our releases. We love you guys so much, and we can't wait for the next episode. Peace.
Much love.